In these frantic hours, catastrophic reports explode from the Black Sea region. Sources embedded with Ukrainian special forces confirm that Moscow's vital Crimea land bridge, the 70-kilometer engineering marvel linking Russia to its annexed peninsula, has been obliterated in a series of precision strikes that severed the rail and road arteries overnight. Explosions rocked the Kerch Strait just after midnight, with eyewitnesses describing massive fireballs illuminating the horizon as Ukrainian drones and missiles targeted fuel depots and support structures, effectively isolating Crimea and trapping thousands of Russian troops and civilians in a sudden siege. Panic grips the streets of Simferopol and Sevastopol, long lines snake around gas stations where pumps run dry, sparking fistfights and desperate sprints for the last liters, while social media erupts with videos of abandoned vehicles clogging highways leading to the now impassable bridge, stranding families with nowhere to turn. The world holds its breath as this strategic lifeline, built at a cost of over $3 billion and symbolizing Putin's grip on the region, lies in smoking ruins, its destruction not just a military blow but a humanitarian flashpoint, with reports of over 50,000 civilians scrambling for evacuation routes that no longer exist. Russian state media scrambles to downplay the scale, but satellite imagery tells a different story. Twisted metal spans the water, oil slicks spread across the sea, and emergency flares light up the night as rescue teams battle infernos that threaten to consume nearby tankers. This isn't a skirmish, it's a seismic shift in the war's geography, catching even seasoned analysts off guard with its audacity and timing, right as winter bites and supplies dwindle. But this is merely the detonator. The deeper tremors will shake politics, ignite military reprisals, crash economies, warp information flows, and fracture psyches across borders. What desperate moves will the Kremlin make to reclaim its foothold? How will isolated forces fight back amid fuel shortages? We'll unpack the global market shocks, the propaganda blitz twisting truths, and the human toll that's turning paradise into peril. Hit subscribe now and turn on notifications so you don't miss a single update in this rapidly evolving crisis, because when icons like the Crimea Bridge fall, the ripples reach every corner of the globe. The isolation of Crimea isn't ending, it's just the beginning of a broader unraveling. Official voices from the Kremlin echo with outrage, as Foreign Minister Lavrov condemns the bridge's destruction as a barbaric act of terrorism orchestrated by Ukrainian nationalists backed by Western puppeteers, vowing swift retaliation while insisting that Crimea's sovereignty remains unchallenged despite the severed link. Yet, in heated sessions of the Federation Council, regional delegates from the South press for emergency aid corridors, their demands clashing with central edicts that prioritize military resupply over civilian evacuations, creating a stark rift where proclaimed resilience masks frantic internal debates on whether to declare martial law across the peninsula. The disconnect sharpens. Publicly, Putin addresses the nation from the Kremlin, promising to rebuild the bridge 10 times stronger and punishing those responsible with the full might of Russian justice, but leaked diplomatic cables reveal overtures to Turkey for alternative sea routes, betraying a leadership caught off balance by the strike's precision and the optics of vulnerability it exposes to domestic rivals. Governments across the globe respond with calculated caution. In Washington, the State Department issues a measured statement praising Ukraine's defensive ingenuity without claiming credit, convening allies in a virtual NATO summit where Secretary Blinken urges restraint to avoid escalation, though behind scenes, intelligence sharing ramps up to support Kyiv with real-time satellite data on Russian naval movements. European capitals fracture in their unity. Berlin's Foreign Office calls for de-escalation talks mediated by the United Nations, emphasizing humanitarian access for the estimated 200,000 civilians now isolated, while Paris pushes for tighter sanctions on Russian shipping firms that could add another €5 billion in penalties, highlighting the tension between compassion and confrontation. Contradictions surface everywhere. Ankara's President Erdogan offers neutral mediation, publicly neutral but privately negotiating with Moscow for discounted gas flows totaling 20 billion cubic meters annually, a pragmatic play that underscores the hollowness of alliances strained by geography and greed. At the core of this political whirlwind lies the human exodus. Over 30,000 Russian passport holders, many relocated settlers from the mainland, flood makeshift ports in Sevastopol seeking ferries that can carry only 5,000 passengers daily, their pleas for extraction ignored in favor of troop reinforcements numbering 15,000 fresh conscripts funneled through risky airlifts. This isn't abstract policy, it's a calculated unraveling, with Crimean authorities, appointed directly from Moscow, issuing conflicting orders, one moment rationing fuel for essential services and the next seizing private yachts for military use, fueling accusations of abandonment from local assemblies that represent 500,000 residents. Sources within the presidential administration hint at least 8 high-level purges in the defense ministry, targeting officers blamed for intelligence failures that allowed the strikes to penetrate defenses layered with over 100 anti-air systems. The official line falters under pressure. State television airs defiant footage of engineers surveying the wreckage, claiming repairs could begin within 72 hours, but ground reports paint a grimmer picture. Debris fields spanning 2 kilometers block all traffic, stranding supply convoys loaded with 3,000 tons of food and medicine meant for frontline hospitals. Actions speak louder than words. Emergency decrees nationalize private shipping assets worth over $1 billion to improvise sea bridges, clashing with quiet concessions to international observers from the Red Cross, who gain access to assess the crisis affecting 150,000 children in schools now short on heating as winter temperatures drop to -10 degrees. This duplicity breeds speculation of a broader political pivot, with exiled opposition figures in Vilnius amplifying calls for Crimean autonomy, drawing digital support from networks reaching 10 million users across Eastern Europe. But this is only part of the picture. The political posturing conceals deeper schisms, where loyalty to the center erodes amid the isolation, turning a prized territory into a liability that tests the Kremlin's narrative of unbreakable unity. Picture the tension in those dimly lit war rooms. A leadership that once annexed with audacity now scrambles to contain the fallout, their resolve cracking under the weight of public discontent. Why the strike now, when fuel lines run dry and morale wanes? The gap between defiant rhetoric and desperate maneuvers signals not just a tactical loss, but a strategic humiliation that could embolden challengers within and without. As positions harden and alliances waver, the central question persists: can Moscow reclaim its foothold, or is this the prelude to a forced retreat? The political currents swirl faster, pulling the entire conflict into uncharted depths. Explosions still echo across the Kerch Strait as Russian forces scramble in disarray, with armored convoys racing toward Sevastopol's ports where over 10,000 troops dig in, fortifying positions against Ukrainian incursions probing the now vulnerable flanks exposed by the bridge's collapse. Defections hit hard. Units stationed in Feodosia, totaling around 2,000 soldiers, mutiny over fuel shortages, hijacking fuel trucks carrying 500 liters each to barter for safe passage back to the mainland, while command posts buzz with urgent radio chatter demanding air support that never arrives due to grounded squadrons low on aviation fuel. The pace surges, artillery barrages light up the night sky, shells whistling over coastal defenses as Ukrainian special forces, numbering 500 elite operatives, infiltrate supply lines, sabotaging depots that hold 20,000 tons of ammunition, turning the peninsula into a tinderbox where every spark risks catastrophe. Threats pour from Moscow's high command, with Defense Minister Shoigu issuing orders to unleash missile salvos targeting Ukrainian launch sites, vowing to reclaim the bridge within 48 hours using pontoon alternatives spanning 3 kilometers, but reality bites back. Naval vessels in the Black Sea Fleet, over 30 warships strong, remain anchored amid a gasoline crisis that idles engines, leaving them sitting ducks for drone swarms that have already sunk 2 patrol boats in the past 12 hours. The rhythm accelerates, helicopter rotors thump overhead, evacuating wounded from skirmishes where Russian Marines clash with local partisans in the hills, hand-to-hand fights claiming 50 lives in brutal melees fueled by desperation, as snipers pick off officers coordinating from bunkers buried under 10 meters of earth. Isolated garrisons fracture further. At least 4 colonels from the Black Sea Command have gone dark, presumed to have surrendered with their platoons of 300 men each, handing over radar installations to Kiev in exchange for amnesty promises. This military meltdown intensifies with every passing minute. Airfields in Zankoy scramble what remains of their MiG fighters, only 12 operational jets, on suicide runs to disrupt Ukrainian advances, but anti-air fire downs 3 in rapid succession, debris raining over villages housing 20,000 civilians pressed into service as spotters. Oligarch-funded mercenaries, once bolstering defenses with private armies of 1,000 contractors, abandoned posts for private boats slipping out to sea, their departure exposing gaps in the line stretching 50 kilometers along the coast, where Ukrainian artillery pounds positions relentlessly, each volley shaking the ground and eroding morale among conscripts who haven't seen resupply in 3 days. The drama escalates. Explosions rip through underground fuel bunkers near Yalta, igniting reserves of 1 million liters that burn for hours, sending toxic smoke plumes visible from 100 kilometers away, while sabotage teams cut power lines feeding radar arrays, plunging surveillance into blackout and allowing infiltration boats to slip past patrols every few hours. Forces on the ground devolve into chaos. tank crews in T-90s, over 80 vehicles strong, idle without diesel, their turrets silent as mechanics siphon from civilian cars, sparking riots at checkpoints where queues of refugees beg passage on foot across minefields laced with 10,000 anti-personnel devices. The tempo races on, special forces raids turn inward, with loyalist squads hunting defectors through the streets of Simferopol, gunfire popping in urban alleys as factions clash, downing quadcopters scouting for weak points and capturing 24 prisoners who reveal plans for amphibious assaults involving 20,000 reinforcements stalled on the Russian side. Winter storms compound the nightmare, waves crashing over improvised docks unable to handle ferries rated for only 2,000 tons, sinking one overloaded vessel and drowning over 100 evacuees in icy waters, a grim tally that broadcasts via smuggled phones, amassing views in the tens of millions and shattering recruitment drives back home. Amid the fray, opportunistic strikes from afar exploit the void, NATO surveillance planes circle at high altitude, tracking the disarray and feeding coordinates that enable Ukrainian long-range fires to hit ammo trains derailed near the ruins, detonating payloads equivalent to 500 tons of explosives in chain reactions that light the horizon. The military apparatus, engineered for dominance, now convulses in isolation, its chains of command snapping like the bridge cables themselves. Subscribe right now to keep pace with these battlefield breakthroughs, because as positions crumble and loyalty splinter, the next assault could redraw the map overnight. However, beneath the blasts and betrayals lurks the inexorable pull of economics, where scarcity turns soldiers into scavengers and strategies into survival games. Commodity markets seize up as the Crimea Bridge's destruction triggers a fuel apocalypse on the peninsula, with gasoline reserves plummeting to less than 10% capacity across 20 major depots, forcing black market prices to skyrocket fivefold to over 2,000 rubles per liter in Sevastopol, where long-haul truckers abandon routes carrying 300 tons of grain daily, stranding harvests worth $500 million in silos exposed to the elements. Global energy benchmarks react sharply. Natural gas futures climb 12% on the Amsterdam exchange, adding €50 to monthly bills for 40 million European households reliant on Black Sea pipelines that now face bottlenecks, reducing flows by 30 billion cubic meters annually and prompting emergency imports from Qatar that inflate shipping costs by 25% across Mediterranean lanes. Russian state coffers bleed. The bridge's loss severs supply chains valued at $2 billion monthly in military logistics alone, compounding sanctions that have already drained $1 trillion from foreign reserves since the conflict's escalation, pushing the central bank to inject 50 billion rubles in emergency liquidity to stabilize the ruble hovering at 120 to the dollar. In Beijing, policymakers voice alarm over disruptions to joint Black Sea energy projects worth $10 billion, accelerating diversification with Iranian suppliers to cover 10% of their crude needs, a pivot that strains Moscow's export quotas of 1 million barrels daily and reshapes trade dynamics in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Brussels activates crisis protocols, with the European Commission allocating €2 billion from cohesion funds to bolster Ukrainian border infrastructure, demanding transparency on Russian naval blockades that threaten grain shipments totaling 15 million tons yearly through Odessa ports, a lifeline for food security in the Middle East where prices could surge 30%, igniting inflationary pressures in economies dependent on those imports. The scope expands coldly. London's FTSE drops 3% as mining firms linked to Crimean titanium deposits, producing 5,000 tons monthly, halt operations, rippling to aerospace suppliers in the United States where component costs rise 15%, delaying deliveries of 100 commercial jets and costing carriers millions in grounded fleet days. Geopolitical fault lines shift under economic strain. Ankara leverages its position, threatening to close the Bosporus to Russian tankers carrying 40% of exports unless compensated with discounted volumes of 5 billion cubic meters of gas, a bargaining chip that could redirect flows toward Greece and Italy, inflating Turkey's own energy imports by 10% while exposing NATO's southern flank to volatility. In Washington, Treasury enacts targeted measures freezing assets of Crimean-linked entities valued at $3 billion, funneling $100 million in aid to Kyiv for alternative fuel depots capable of storing 2 million liters, a move that accelerates Western decoupling from Russian hydrocarbons, projected to shave 2 percentage points off Moscow's GDP growth already mired in negative territory. The cascade intensifies. Cryptocurrency platforms see a 40% spike in ruble conversions to stablecoins, totaling $1 billion in volume as peninsula elites seek offshore havens, but European regulators clamp down, blocking transfers exceeding €50,000 to curb capital flight that could destabilize banks holding 20% of regional deposits. This economic siege redraws alliances on a grand scale. India, absorbing discounted Russian oil at 1.5 million barrels per day, pauses new tenders amid secondary sanction fears, turning to Venezuelan sources and boosting global tanker rates by 18% as routes detour around contested waters, while African nations like Egypt face wheat shortfalls of 8 million tons, driving bread prices up 25% and sparking unrest in cities housing 10 million residents. Multilateral bodies mobilize. The World Bank warns of a half-point shave to global growth if Crimea's isolation persists, estimating reconstruction costs at $5 billion for makeshift sea links that could take 6 months to operationalize, diverting funds from development projects in Asia worth $200 billion annually. Corporate exodus accelerates. Shell and TotalEnergies withdraw from joint ventures in the region, evacuating 200 expatriates and writing off investments of $800 million, as insurance premiums for Black Sea shipping quadruple, adding $1 billion to annual logistics burdens for exporters from the Balkans to the Caucasus. The global machinery grinds with impersonal force. Renewable sectors in Scandinavia surge 8% in stock value, with wind turbine orders for 15 gigawatts pouring in as Europe fast-tracks green transitions to offset gas losses equivalent to powering 20 million homes, while Chinese manufacturers stockpile palladium from alternative mines, mitigating shortages from Crimean refineries that process 3,000 tons yearly, essential for electronics that underpin supply chains. Feeding 1 billion devices worldwide. In the shadows, opportunistic players emerge. Dubai ports report a 30% uptick in Russian-flagged vessels seeking refuge, offloading cargoes worth $400 million in frozen assets, as Gulf states like the UAE position themselves as neutral hubs, negotiating deals that could capture 5% of redirected trade volumes. The economic architecture, once anchored by Crimea's strategic ports handling 100 million tons of cargo annually, now tilts precariously, forcing recalibrations from central banks to corner shops where fuel rationing hits 1 liter per vehicle daily, turning mobility into a luxury. Yet, this avalanche unearths buried opportunities amid the rubble. Tech firms in Silicon Valley accelerate drone logistics pilots to bypass choke points, potentially revolutionizing aid delivery for isolated zones with capacities of 10,000 packages per flight, while Eastern European farmers eye expanded Black Sea access, boosting output by 20% to fill voids left by Russian grains. The vast tableau unfolds in numbers and negotiations. A peninsula's plight cascades into continental realignments, where scarcity breeds innovation and isolation fosters interdependence. And now the intrigue deepens. These fiscal fractures don't just strain budgets, they probe the human core, where deprivation etches lines of doubt and resolve into the fabric of societies on the brink. As the smoke clears over the Kerch Strait's wreckage, the haunting question surfaces: what does the vanishing of Moscow's Crimea land bridge truly signify for a world entangled in this protracted struggle, and for every individual caught in its undertow, from peninsula residents to distant observers? In the hushed aftermath, Crimeans confront a profound psychic rupture, where over 2 million locals, many relocated from the Russian heartland, stare into an abyss of abandonment, their sense of belonging shattered after a decade of integration promises that now ring false amid gasoline lines stretching 2 kilometers and power outages plunging homes into darkness for 12 hours daily, fostering a collective trauma that mirrors the Soviet-era isolations but amplified by instant global connectivity reaching 90% of households. This transcends tactical loss. It's a spiritual siege, where families numbering in the hundreds of thousands huddle in unheated apartments, grappling with the erosion of identity as Ukrainian broadcasts infiltrate via smuggled radios, sowing seeds of doubt that bloom into quiet defections among 20,000 border guards questioning their oaths. The epical weight bears down relentlessly. Envision the bridge's fall as a metaphor for empire's fragility, evoking the Berlin Wall's tumble that reshaped lives for 4 generations, yet intensified here by social feeds exploding with raw despair, amassing 100 million views of stranded children at checkpoints, igniting a global empathy crisis that burdened psyches in capitals from Kiev to Washington, where citizens ponder their own securitless in an age of asymmetric warfare. For the international soul, this isolation peels back veils of normalcy, compelling Europeans to reckon with refugee tides potentially swelling to 500,000 across the Black Sea, stirring anxieties in host nations that could strain social fabrics already frayed by economic pinches, while in Moscow, the regime's aura of invincibility cracks, leaving 80 million Russians to internalize the humiliation through state narratives that twist defeat into destiny, potentially spiking mental health crises by 20% as isolationist fervor clashes with suppressed grief. The philosophical undercurrent runs deep. territorial claims forged in conquest prove ephemeral when logistics fail, illuminating humanity's innate yearning for connection over division, a lesson etched in the faces of elders in Simferopol who whisper of lost paradises turned prisons. Yet, within this mental maelstrom, sparks of resilience ignite. Underground networks of activists, spanning 50 communities, circulate messages of unity via encrypted apps used by 1 million users, fostering dialogues that surge 40% in engagement, as people reclaim narratives from propaganda machines dominating 85% of airwaves, birthing a tentative hope amid the fuel-scarce nights. For us witnessing from afar, it mirrors inward. How does a strategic artery severance challenge our illusions of stability, urging policymakers in Brussels and Beijing to reflect on interventions that prolonged suffering, perhaps averting echoes in volatile regions like the South China Sea where similar flashpoints loom? The human cost imprints indelibly. Soldiers on the front, over 15,000 strong, battle not just foes but futility, their resolve waning under rationed diesel that strands patrols, compounding battle fatigue that claims 10 times more to despair than direct fire, underscoring psychic scars that linger beyond ceasefires. This ordeal embeds in the shared consciousness as a parable of hubris, where the exodus of 30,000 civilians via perilous sea routes symbolizes not mere flight, but the retreat of faith in overarching powers, prompting thinkers from Harvard lecture halls to Istanbul cafes to debate if such collapses herald democratic rebirths or authoritarian rebounds, with surveys showing 60% of Eastern Europeans fearing spillover instability. In these shadowed hours, as ferries bob empty on choppy waves, the globe exhales collectively, contemplating order's brittleness. Has the bridge's demise marked the war's turning point, or merely deepened the divide? Subscribe immediately to delve into these evolving revelations with us, guaranteeing you insights that navigate the fog of uncertainty, because grasping these inner tempests is essential to forging paths through the turmoil. But everything is just beginning. The psychological reverberations of Crimea's severance will echo across years, compelling us to mend not only infrastructures and economies, but the fractured trusts that sustain civilizations. What emerges from this isolation, reconciliation, radicalization, or an unforeseen equilibrium? The inquiry lingers, drawing us inexorably toward the horizon's mysteries.